one of the most compelling elements of that story for me, of the Walter McMillian story, is that you learn about this man, his life, and you actually learn his story. And that requires a level of empathy to understand a person's story, a person's background, a person's history, and take that into consideration when we think about justice.
Yeah.
What do you think in terms of the United States and our sense of empathy and our sense of justice? What's happened to that over the course of the last century?
Yeah, no, I think it's really critical. I don't think you can effectively advocate for people you do not understand. And it's when we get closer to people that we really understand who they are and what their lives are about. And I don't think that our country has done a good job of owning up to the ways in which it has created anguish and pain and suffering and marginality with a kind of thoughtful engagement about the people.
Why is that?
You know, I think it's because we have developed some really bad habits dating back to the time of slavery. I mean, you know, for me, the great evil of American slavery was not involuntary servitude, it was the narrative of racial difference that we created. We've always wanted to feel good about who we are. We've always wanted to be proud. And we'll deny certain truths if it complicates our feeling of being good or being proud. And, you know, the great difference between America's slavery and the rest of the world, most countries had slavery during a period of their history, but they were mostly societies with slaves. We became a slave society. We wanted slave owners to feel good about the fact that they were owning other human beings, so we created this narrative that black people were different, not fully human, not as smart as, not as hardworking as. And that narrative of racial difference, that ideology of white supremacy, was to me the great evil of American slavery. And we did it so that people could feel Christian and moral and just, even while they owned other human beings. But it's why I don't believe that slavery ended in 1865. I think it just evolved. And we've never confronted that narrative. And so we had decades of lynching and terrorism. We had segregation. And even the civil rights movement has become too celebratory. We don't talk about the resistance. And that's left us vulnerable to cases like Walter McMillian, where we presume the dangerousness and guilt of black and brown people. And you see it today with the shootings of these unarmed men by police officers. You see it when people of color feel threatened and menaced and harassed. You see it in the way our system functions. We've had 152 people exonerated, that is, proved innocent after being sentenced to death. And almost all of them are poor. They're disproportionately black and brown, and it's because we apply this presumption of dangerousness and guilt to black and brown people. And that's the challenge I think we face in this country. Unlike other societies, we've never made truth-telling about our mistakes a priority. We didn't have truth and reconciliation after the civil rights movement. We haven't done what Germany is doing around the Holocaust. If you go to Germany, you see markers and monuments everywhere, marking the spaces where Jewish families were abducted and taken to the concentration camps. And they want you to go to the camps and reflect soberly on the history of the Holocaust. We want the opposite. We don't like talking about race. We don't like talking about slavery. We don't like talking about lynching or segregation or the exploitation of Native people. And because of that, we remain vulnerable in our criminal justice system to replicating these dynamics of racial bias and discrimination against the poor and abusing power that have too often corrupted the way our society functions. And so I think working in the criminal justice system gives you an opportunity to push against that resistance, the arrogance of never having to say, I'm sorry, the consciousness that comes when you're kind of reflecting on the ways you've failed.